thousands of sheep were once abandoned on a cold, lonely island far from the world. There were no farmers, no shelter, and barely any food. Everyone believed they would vanish within months. But decades later, when people finally returned, what they discovered was beyond imagination. The sheep had changed in ways no one thought possible. Nature had done something extraordinary, something that challenged science itself. What began as a story of survival turned into one of the most surprising transformations ever witnessed. The question remains, how did these forgotten sheep defy everything and build life on a lifeless island? The forgotten sheep of Campbell Island. Campbell Island, located deep in the South Pacific Ocean, was first discovered in 1810 by an Australian captain during a sealing voyage. The ship he commanded was owned by the Campbell brothers of Sydney, so he decided to name the island after them. This remote land soon became a place of human ambition, trade, and survival. In its earliest years, the island was mainly used for hunting sea lions. The harsh yet rich surroundings offered both danger and opportunity. Later, it became a base for whalers who found its location convenient for their long voyages. By the end of the 19th century, Campbell Island's role shifted again when it was brought under the pastoral lease system in 1896. This system allowed individuals to lease government-owned land for livestock farming, turning the isolated island into a potential home for agriculture. James Gordon from Gisborne was the first person to take on this challenge. He secured a lease agreement and began transforming the wild landscape into a farm. He shipped around 400 sheep and brought timber to construct shelters and other necessary buildings. His ambition was to make the island productive and profitable, but the conditions were far from easy. By 19,000, the initial farming effort had started to collapse. Harsh weather, isolation, and the high costs of maintaining the operation made it difficult for Gordon to continue. Eventually, he faced financial trouble and had to abandon the project. The lease was then taken over by Captain Tucker, who saw potential where others had failed. Determined to expand the operation, Tucker increased the number of sheep on the island dramatically. He sent 3 additional shipments, each carrying about 1,000 sheep. Most of these were merino or merino crossbreeds, prized for their fine wool. Tucker believed the island could support a large flock, and at first, it seemed he was right. By 1913, there were between 7,000 and 8,000 sheep roaming the island. The environment appeared suitable for them. Campbell Island had diverse vegetation, including unique giant plants known as megaherbs. These plants absorbed large amounts of sunlight and provided rich nourishment for the animals. They thrived despite the cold, wet climate of the Southern Ocean. For a time, the plan worked well. The sheep adapted, the land provided food, and the wool production increased. But the balance between nature and human activity did not last. Over the years, the grazing pressure began to wear down the vegetation. The once lush food supply started to decline. The sheep, having multiplied rapidly, consumed the plants faster than they could regrow. As the environment deteriorated, the animals began to suffer. Their health declined, and the population slowly decreased. By 1931, the situation had become unsustainable. The sheep numbers had dropped to around 4,000, and the project was no longer viable. The isolation of Campbell Island turned from an asset into a curse. The workers who managed the farm were stranded after the operation ended. With no boat and no communication with the mainland, they were trapped on the island for 2 years. Food supplies were limited, and their only company was the dwindling flock of sheep. Life was harsh, cold, and lonely. Eventually, the government intervened and sent a ship to rescue them. However, the journey turned out to be a loss in every sense. The wool collected during those difficult years was worth less than the cost of the rescue trip. The workers, already worn out by isolation and hardship, received no pay for their efforts. Their work and sacrifice were forgotten almost as soon as they returned home. After the people left, the sheep were abandoned on the island. These animals, bred for human care and regular shearing, were not suited to life in the wild. Without people to shear them, their wool grew uncontrollably. The heavy fleece became a burden, making it difficult for them to move or survive. The harsh environment of Campbell Island offered little mercy. These sheep were domesticated creatures left in a place that demanded wild instincts. Over time, nature slowly reclaimed the island. The vegetation began to recover, and the sounds of human activity faded. The once busy pastures became silent again, except for the wind and the sea. The few sheep that managed to survive did so through resilience, though their numbers gradually decreased. Campbell Island's story reflects the fragile balance between human ambition and nature's limits. What began as an effort to turn a remote island into a thriving sheep farm ended in hardship and loss. The land, the people, and the animals all bore the cost of an idea that could not withstand isolation and time: the remarkable survival. The conditions on Campbell Island gave the sheep a unique chance to survive in the wild. The island was surrounded by steep rocky cliffs that kept out most predators. The strong, cold winds that constantly swept across the land also prevented insects like flies from becoming a serious problem. These natural barriers provided an unexpected form of protection for the sheep, allowing them to live without many of the usual threats they would face elsewhere. In 1913, the sheep population on Campbell Island reached its highest number. The animals thrived for a while, feeding on the island's vegetation, but by 1931, the number of sheep began to fall sharply. Food became scarce because the growing flock had consumed much of the available vegetation. With less food and harsher conditions, many sheep started to die off. Then something unexpected happened. Between 1931 and 1958, the sheep population began to increase again, even though there was no human care or management on the island. No one was herding them, feeding them, or protecting them. Yet somehow, their numbers began to rise naturally. This mysterious recovery was the result of a powerful natural process: adaptation. When the sheep were first left alone on Campbell Island, many of them could not cope with the new conditions. They were used to being tended by humans and had lost many of the instincts wanted to survive in the wild. These weaker sheep struggled to find food or withstand the cold, and they passed away without leaving any offspring. But among the flock, some sheep carried traits that helped them survive. They were stronger, more resilient, and better suited to the island's harsh environment. These tougher sheep lived longer and passed their strength on to their lambs. Over time, the population became made up mostly of these hardy survivors. Each new generation grew stronger and more capable of living without human help. Slowly, the sheep evolved into a group perfectly adapted to the challenges of Campbell Island. As the weaker sheep passed away and the population decreased, the island's vegetation began to recover. Grass, moss, and other plants grew back across the landscape. This fresh growth provided plenty of food for the surviving sheep, which helped their numbers rise again. Nature had balanced itself without any human interference. Another reason the flock managed to thrive was the lack of predators. On most islands or open lands, sheep face threats from wild animals. But on Campbell Island, there were no such dangers. The sheep could roam freely, graze peacefully, and raise their young without fear of attack. The combination of abundant food and safety from predators created the perfect environment for their gradual recovery. Over the next 40 years, the sheep of Campbell Island lived completely on their own. There were no farmers to shear them, feed them, or provide shelter. They learned to survive through natural selection alone. This was remarkable considering that these sheep had once been entirely dependent on humans. The flock had evolved from domesticated animals into a strong, self-reliant population capable of living in the wild. The unbelievable evolution and fate of the sheeps. When people returned to Campbell Island in 1975 to collect the sheep that had been left there years before, they were met with a sight that left them completely astonished. At first glance, the animals looked like ordinary sheep of the same breed that had once lived on the mainland. But upon closer examination, it became clear that something extraordinary had happened. These sheep were no longer the same kind. Over the years of isolation, harsh weather, and survival challenges, they had evolved into an entirely different form, both in body and behavior. The physical transformation of these sheep was striking. Their bodies had adapted to the severe environment of the island. Their legs grew longer, allowing them to move more easily across the rocky and uneven terrain. Their heads were held higher, giving them a proud, upright stance, unlike the sheep that grazed peacefully in gentler pastures on the mainland. The relentless weather had taken a toll on their wool, which became rough, matted, and damaged by the wind and rain. Their jaws had also changed shape. Because of the tough, fibrous plants they were forced to eat, their mouths grew warped and stronger, adjusted for tearing through the coarse vegetation that covered the island. When scientists tried to feed these sheep traditional hay, they encountered something very unusual. The sheep did not understand how to eat the food in the normal way. Instead of calmly chewing the hay placed before them, they tried to pull it from its position as they would have done with the plants in their wild environment. This habit caused the hay to scatter everywhere. The scientists eventually had to tie the hay into tight bundles so that the sheep could grip and tear at it in the way they were used to. This simple act revealed how deeply the sheep had adapted to their surroundings and how their instincts had shifted away from domesticated behavior. The changes were not only physical, but also behavioral. These island sheep displayed unique habits that set them apart from ordinary flocks. One remarkable difference was the way they gave birth. Unlike most domestic sheep that lie down during labor, the Campbell Island sheep gave birth while standing. Their lambs, astonishingly, were able to stand and walk within just a few minutes after birth. This early mobility was a critical survival skill, helping the newborns keep up with their mothers in the rough, exposed landscape. Even their health had changed. Over time, the sheep developed a natural resistance to two major diseases that commonly affected domestic breeds. They also began to shed their wool naturally, much like their wild ancestors, reducing the need for human care or shearing. Every aspect of their evolution showed how life on the isolated island had shaped them into resilient, self-sufficient creatures. Their daily routine reflected their determination to survive in the face of constant challenges. The sheep grazed tirelessly for long hours, starting as early as 4 in the morning and continuing until nearly midnight. The harsh winds and freezing rains that swept across the island did not stop them. When the winds grew strong, they would turn their backs and keep eating, bracing themselves against the force of nature. This simple yet effective behavior ensured that they never went hungry and managed to thrive where few other animals could. However, as time passed, human priorities shifted. The government became increasingly concerned about protecting Campbell Island's fragile natural ecosystem. In 1937, the island was officially designated for the protection of its unique flora and fauna. Then, in 1954, Campbell Island was declared a full nature reserve. With this decision came a difficult order. All the sheep had to be removed. By 1958, a scientific survey found that the population of sheep had fallen to fewer than 1,000. But, as nature often does, the numbers began to rise again in the following years. This posed a new problem because the growing sheep population threatened the island's vegetation and the balance of its ecosystem. To manage the situation, a fence was built across the island to divide the territory, and organized culling operations began. Teams were sent to remove large numbers of sheep in a series of eradication campaigns. Over the years, thousands of sheep were eliminated to restore the island's natural state. Around 3,000 were culled during these operations. By the end of the 1980s, the last of the Campbell Island sheep had been removed. For many, it was a sad and emotional moment. These animals had survived generations of isolation, transformed by nature into something truly remarkable, only to be wiped out in the name of environmental protection. Yet, as painful as it was, the decision was made for the greater good, to allow the island's original plant and animal life to recover and thrive once more. Even so, the story of the Campbell Island sheep did not end entirely in tragedy. Not every sheep was destroyed. A few were saved, ensuring that the legacy of this rare and fascinating group would not disappear completely. Their survival stands as a reminder of nature's incredible power to adapt, transform, and endure, even in the most remote and unforgiving corners of the world. The struggle and survival. In the mid-1970s, an extraordinary rescue mission took place that would preserve one of the rarest and most remarkable flocks in history, the Campbell Island sheep. Between 1975 and 1976, dedicated scientists and rescuers managed to save 10 of these sheep for breeding purposes in New Zealand. The operation was not an easy one. After years of isolation on the remote Campbell Island, the sheep had become completely wild. They were cautious, quick, and difficult to approach, making the mission extremely challenging. Despite the harsh conditions and the difficulties involved, the rescuers refused to give up. They used a clever technique involving special whistles to guide and move the sheep from one area to another. This strategy worked remarkably well, allowing them to gradually gather the animals together. In total, the team succeeded in collecting 58 sheep, a significant achievement given the circumstances. These animals were then carefully transported to New Zealand for further care and breeding. The sheep that arrived in New Zealand were surprisingly large and strong. They looked much like ordinary domestic sheep, but they had some remarkable qualities that set them apart. Their lambs were especially robust, showing the benefits of generations of survival in a tough, isolated environment. However, their deep maternal instincts, while admirable, came at a cost. The energy and care these mothers devoted to their young often left them weakened, demonstrating how survival and nurturing were constant struggles in their lives. From the 58 sheep collected, experts from the Ministry of Agriculture and Fisheries carefully selected 10 of the healthiest ones to continue the breeding program. The process of moving these chosen sheep to safety was incredibly demanding. The scientists had to tether them gently using dog collars to keep them under control. Then, one by one, they carried the animals across a steep and rugged hill that stretched for about 1.2 miles. It was hard physical work, but it was the only way to ensure the sheep's safe transport to the ship that would take them away from the island. When the small group of sheep finally left Campbell Island, they carried with them not just their own lives, but also the survival of a unique genetic heritage. These animals represented generations of adaptation to one of the most unforgiving environments on Earth. Thanks to the efforts of the rescuers and scientists, their lineage continued to thrive in New Zealand as a purebred herd. For many years, these sheep stood as living proof of resilience and careful conservation. But in 2017, tragedy struck. A shocking event unfolded when 5 of the rare Campbell Island sheep were stolen and slaughtered. This act caused an immediate and devastating blow to the already limited population. The loss was not just about numbers, it was the loss of irreplaceable genetic diversity and history. Before the incident, around 35 sheep remained. Afterward, only 30 individuals were left, placing the entire population at serious risk. The owner of the flock was heartbroken. These sheep were not just valuable because of their rarity, they carried a unique genetic legacy that linked them to the rugged, isolated island from which they came. The stolen sheep were especially precious because several of them were pregnant and due to give birth within just 2 weeks. The loss of those unborn lambs made the tragedy even more painful. The owner suspected that whoever had taken the animals did so for their meat, without realizing, or perhaps without caring about, the great scientific and historical importance of what they had destroyed. Despite this cruel setback, the surviving sheep continued to live under careful protection. Their caretakers remained determined to preserve their lineage, ensuring that this remarkable breed would not disappear completely. With every new lamb born, there was a renewed sense of hope that the Campbell Island sheep would endure for future generations. If the sheep had been left on the island instead of being brought to New Zealand, their story might have taken an entirely different turn. Over time, the isolation and environmental pressures could have caused them to evolve into an entirely new species. Nature has shown time and again that species separated from others often adapt in unique ways, developing new traits to survive in their surroundings. The Campbell Island sheep had already begun that process before humans intervened. Their thick coats, strong bodies, and remarkable endurance were results of living for decades without human care in a wild and windy place. The rescue of the Campbell Island sheep stands as an example of how human action can both preserve and alter the course of natural evolution. While the mission saved the flock from extinction, it also interrupted the natural path they might have taken on their own. Yet, without that intervention, the sheep may have vanished entirely, lost to the harsh elements of their remote island home. If you enjoyed this video, like and subscribe, and also click the next video shown on your screen.